In this video, we are going to be diving into dwarves in wargaming. Why do they exist? Where do they work? Where do they not work? And where did they come from? What is their history? And we may even ponder the questions of, are they a little bit awkward? Or do they have questionable origins? Well, Murray and I are going to dive into this, paint some brand new minis and some classic painting examples that we've brought in from home. And we're going to take a look at all of it in today's video. So let's dive into the history. And this video is sponsored by Corvus Belli and, funnily enough, their new gorgeous dwarves.
So, Tolkien. That'll be the first word on anyone's lips who likes dwarves. Tolkien created the dwarves and then he needed some art for his books, etc. So there's a bunch of artists, namely the Hildebrandt brothers spring to my mind. They did all this amazing art. They look very much like little traveling folk. Big, heavy traveling gear, nicely trimmed, little traveling hoods and everything. Actually, they look really reminiscent of the dwarves in Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
So while these original designs are a little bit distant from the dwarves we know in miniatures today, it was in fact the writing of Tolkien that really established a change from the Norse mythology, where dwarves were a more magical and mysterious race who did live underground. But Tolkien really established the idea of dwarves as being these stoic, brave, loyal, grudge-holding and grudge-bearing dwarves, and that is something that really caught on.
And so then moving on with the advent of a little thing called Dungeons and Dragons in 1974, characters with unique armor became more and more popular, resulting in small companies like Games Workshop producing some officially licensed miniatures for Dungeons and Dragons. They came in sets of 3, so you had like a physical and material progression of your character through your campaign, as well as the physical progression of your character's chin.
The Chad jaw just grows with level.
Oh boy.
What I think is very interesting as we were researching this at this stage is it becomes evident that that idea that many people have of dwarves as being this eternally existing part of fantasy culture is actually really as recent as Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, Tolkien's works adapted them, but dwarves being a big part of fictionalized fantasy is really only a thing since the 80s.
Actually, with this artwork here of the box set of Dungeons and Dragons, produced by Games Workshop. Check out that old logo in the background. But the main artwork here, you can see, is I think one of the first that John Blanche ever did professionally with Games Workshop. And that sort of started his career with them. And you know, it's kind of cool. Eventually, Games Workshop would continue on independently and create their own fantasy game called Warhammer Fantasy. That was in the 80s.
Warhammer Fantasy Battles.
Warhammer Fantasy Battles, yes, that is correct.
So Warhammer Fantasy Battle was, of course, exploding, and the dwarves were a big part of that. People really attached to the idea of these stocky, rank-and-file, heavily armored, grudge-bearing soldiers, and the unique little iterations of them within. And as Games Workshop moved on to become incredibly dominating in the sphere of miniatures, you start to see smaller companies adopting dwarves into their game ranges as well.
Years later, in 1997, Peter Jackson goes and hires John Blanche and Alan Lee, 2 remarkably talented artists, to create the visual language for New Line Cinema's The Lord of the Rings trilogy. And it's because of these 2 artists, plenty of other artists, and you know, Weta Workshop had plenty to do with it. They made all sorts of things as well, that we associate everything we know about Lord of the Rings, particularly with the movies, because of them and their influence.
But what is it that makes it iconic?
Yeah, what is it? It is this really rigid and geometric set of lines and shapes, pretty much aesthetically to oppose the design language of the elves. Flowing and natural and elegant lines. Dwarves, big, symmetry, angles, doors, yes, good.
And it's here that we can stop talking about the history from a purely analytical point of view and start talking about the games companies and the dwarven lines they have created and their influence on us, what we like about them, what we don't like about them, and maybe what you like about them. Because this is all gonna end today with Warhammer 40k as we talk about some of the maybe less universally loved dwarves and some of the most universally loved dwarves with the return of Warhammer: The Old World.
Oh, what a teaser. Finally, miniatures. Right, it is now that time to talk about what I personally like about dwarves, where I think they really work, where they excel in their niche of character. But while I ramble, I'm going to be painting at some of the Mount Haven dwarves from Corvus Belli, who are a brand new faction for their Warcrow universe and game. So small tidbit, these guys, when we were given them, Dave and I looked at them and thought, these guys are really, honestly, really cool. Why are they cool? What makes these dwarves cool when we sort of feel a bit mid on other dwarves? These dwarves are buried beneath mountains. That's very dwarfish, check. They've got a lot of artificery, a lot of filigree going about them, scale mail designs, as well as particularly these big shields. I'm just gonna say that the shield's kind of like a door's, but they are a door, literally a door, down to like hinges molded onto it and like door knockers. That seems pretty dwarfy, check. And then we get a little bit different. Dwarves are generally really grumpy when it comes to other races. They don't like each other. Lock the doors, bar them out of the entire underground ecosystem. No one in, no one out. But these Mount Haven dwarves are in fact kind of arms dealers. They will actually sell their weapons out. Well, in actual fact, what they're selling is basically garbage, which is completely outmatched and actually countered by their actual stuff that they make, right? For their actual own guys. It's sort of all an elaborate ruse, a conniving plan to basically outdo everyone else and take them out, when the moment is there.
Very American.
But it's that sort of cheeky connivingness which I think is key to what I like in dwarves. It's that absolute dogmatic willingness to never give up, whatever the odds. They're going down with the ship, giving the middle finger salute to the universe at large, but they will kick you in the shins before they go.
And they are genuinely one of my preferred depictions of dwarves. I think they keep a lot of what's good about the dwarven aesthetic while also being a little bit unique. Well, we're quite happy to be able to share these. These are brand new, revealed only a couple of days ago. They have had models in previous Warcrow supplementation in the background. Warcrow is a really cool game. If you want to check it out, there'll be a link in the description to go check out Corvus Belli and you can see more of the Mount Haven dwarves. Now, I will mention these have been sent to us. These have been sent to us for free, and we are now sponsored by Corvus Belli. We're part of what's called the Corvus Belli Content Creator Nest. We've had a year last year working really closely with Corvus Belli, and we found them to be a fantastic company to work with. So it's kind of like the Games Workshop influencer program where people get sent free stuff from Games Workshop. I'm assuming if dwarves are your thing, if you're watching a video on dwarves, you probably want to see more dwarves, so go check them out.
And the best depictions that I have for this kind of dwarfiness is classic Warhammer Fantasy Battles dwarves, or the old world dwarves as we might know them now. What is great about these is the amount of whimsy and absolute nonsense that they have. Honestly, they give me the feel of the Gauls in Asterix and Obelisk. Happy-go-lucky sort of nonsense with a few grudges on the side. Lords being carried aloft on the palanquins is just a really big shield, by 4 other dwarves, all with axes with one hand on the shield. You've got their absolutely ridiculous drinking culture. You've got the Slayers, which, to redeem themselves, we will find death and glory in battle, and they just run charging headlong, completely naked except for a large ginger beard, into war. And then you've got their ridiculous contraptions. You have big blunderbuss guns and whatever. What's it called? The bloody axe thrower. It's literally just a conveyor belt that throws axes at anything that gets in the way. It's that kind of nonsense that really endears me to fantasy dwarves. And then, on the more grounded side, or maybe the underground side, if you will, we have the Lord of the Rings dwarves, specifically the ones created by New Line Cinema for the movie trilogy. And what changes here is that, of course, it's all Tolkien. You get incredible insights to what characters spend their time doing, reminiscing, architecture, cities, pylons, obelisks, all the things. And so then all of this design can immediately be transferred into the designs for the characters, aka Gimli. You see all the filigree and the designs within his armor woven into his clothes, in his mannerisms, the way he treats other people. You get all that encapsulated within one bombastic character. Boom, here you go. Here's a dwarf, and it's fantastic. You paint a normal-sized human, there's a lot to deal with, but he gets even smaller. All of the detail and the character and the personality is still there. If you can do that with, something that small, then I think that means to me that you've got something really iconic and fun. And now, to bring it all back, this is what I like about these new Mount Haven dwarves. So they encapsulate everything that has made traditional, classical fantasy dwarves for me, and altered it and elevated just enough for their sort of modernized world and cultures, just a little bit, enough to be interesting. If you go a bit too far in one direction, then you sort of lose any identity of what was a dwarf. And if it isn't a dwarf anymore, what was the point of making it a dwarf? And that leads us to the next section.
All right, so now it's time to move to a part of the video where we talk about dwarves where they don't work as well or as naturally, and that's dwarves in sci-fi settings. And while I talk about this, you're gonna see some footage of me converting two of the now most famous examples of this into one, because I am turning an Ironhead squat from Necromunda into a League of Votann dwarf for 40k. So dwarves in a science fiction setting naturally start to raise some questions, and originally they came about because, well, the designers in Games Workshop wanted to put elves in 40k. So they made the Eldar, and if they were putting elves in 40k, well, there should be dwarves too. So the squats came out, and these were really interesting. It's clear here they decided to keep some of the elements of mining and traditional fantasy dwarven things like grudges, but then they combined them with, well, other blokes with big beards. They combined them with bikers. The squats really have vibes of industrial biker gangs on big tricycles with big beards, silly helmets, and massive road goggles. And regardless of how beloved these were, mostly because they were removed from the game for a long time and turned into a meme, the reality is the fact that squats disappeared from Warhammer 40k is testament to the fact that they probably didn't sell very well. I think the disconnect from what people love about Tolkien-esque fantasy dwarves, the magical nature of them, really just makes them kind of short, hairy guys in 40k. And overall, the appeal started to muddy up. They disappeared for a long time, and recently Games Workshop have brought the Leagues of Votann out. And the Leagues of Votann, I think, are a really interesting example of trying to modernize dwarves. In the lore, they're humans. In the faction, they're Xenos. And from a design perspective, they're kind of a little bit of both. The Leagues of Votann lean quite heavily into those original Nordic mythology and roots that you see in Tolkien's dwarves. They're covered in runes, and they have a strong Viking aesthetic, which in my opinion kind of clashes a little bit with the fact that the Space Wolves already have that pretty cornered. There is also a distinct modernism to the Leagues of Votann that makes them look a little bit like they could fit in a different game system and perhaps a more generic sci-fi system, as they lack pretty much all the grimdark trappings of Warhammer 40k. So for me, this has actually led the Leagues of Votann to be a faction that I don't really care for. And I used my words carefully there. I don't care for them. I don't dislike them, I don't like them, I kind of nothing them. They just seem to lack a real sense of heart and grounding in the setting of 40k, at least from my perspective. I'm sure some people absolutely love them, but I would wager that most people really don't mind one way or the other because they don't evoke a very strong emotional response. Very indicative of the 2020s very corporate Games Workshop era. They feel safe, they feel clean, they feel kind of boring, to be honest. Conversely, I think the Specialist Games studio at Warhammer 40k fell in love with the old squats and wanting to reimagine them, because around the same time we got the Ironhead squats for Necromunda. And these are a love letter to the original squats. They have some of the dumb, stupid, comical, massive helmets, the visors, the sunglasses, the beards, and their proportions are ridiculous. They are so short and wide. I absolutely love it. And for me, while I do think squats are kind of novel and I'm not that into them, I think that because they lean so heavily into the nostalgia and they evoke a little bit more of that grim, grimy 40k-ness, as well as being very dwarven with their obsession with gems and mining, overall it means that the Ironhead squats are a faction for Necromunda that I think work pretty well. So it's a really good juxtaposition of how nostalgia and some of the traditional properties of dwarves can work in a sci-fi setting where others just kind of feel a bit generic and corporate, at least from my opinion. So you've been watching me combine the two. I've had an idea sitting in the back of my head for about 2 years, and that is a desire to kind of make a Leagues of Votann combat patrol entirely from Ironhead squats prospectors. So if you like the look of this kit bash, as I've made one of the Ironhead squats into this Votann model that no longer looks like Dr. Robotnik and instead looks like a classic squat, let me know, because if there is a lot of love for that idea, I would totally do a video converting an entire combat patrol into this new style, meshing the two together and trying to make dwarves work in 40k. But overall, that's my conversion, and I hope so far in this video we've kind of given you a bit of food for thought. What do you think about dwarves in the worlds of wargaming? Why have they lasted so long? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Or, like I'm sure many people, you're kind of just ambivalent to their existence. Let me know in the comments. There is something a little bit curious about dwarves. A real-world parallel, because of course there are people in the world with dwarfism and there are fantasy creatures known as dwarves. When looking into the history for this video, I did notice there were some strange parallels that could be nothing, could be something. But I really don't feel that qualified to dive into it. I'm not a historian, and I'm certainly not a master of social problems. However, it is clear that around the time that Tolkien was being inspired by the dwarves of Norse mythology, people with actual dwarfism were being exploited in carnivals and quote-unquote freak shows across America. There was a social fascination with dwarves and dwarfism, and one that had been carrying on for hundreds of years, from the 16th century court dwarves through to the present day with them in movie productions. Again, I don't really know where I sit on this. I don't know what it was like in the 30s, and what I do know, it is pretty clear to pretty much everyone I've ever talked to that dwarves in 2026 are mythological, magical fantasy creatures from storybooks that are quite distinct from people in the real world with dwarfism. It's rather interesting because at the same time that dwarves in fantasy settings are quite distinctly and deliberately not humans with dwarfism, we also open up the door when we talk about representation, and it's just something odd. It's just something I found and something I thought I'd mention that it's like a bit weird because there aren't people called elves in the world. I can't walk down to the street and go into a mall and bump into an elf, but we can bump into people who identify as dwarves. So what do you think? You let me know. Is it weird? Is it normal? Or is it so familiar to us all that no one even thinks about it anymore? I don't know. I guess that's just food for thought for this video. Maybe something we can consult like a historian on or something. So when other companies try and create dwarves, they often try and create something unique. And Murray, you're going to be painting up a model or a few models to showcase some of these. What do we got?
Starting off, we have something that is a bit of a classic from, particularly my era growing up. I used to see a lot of the sculpting videos of the Skibor miniatures.
Is it
Skibor? Skybor.
I always thought it was Cybor because of like sci-fi.
Cybor, maybe.
Yeah. So you've been painting this up. We're going to show that on the screen. Tell us, what are some of the iconic ideas behind this?
So these dwarves, I think, are super sort of Celtic in that aesthetic. They've got all the filigree and sort of runes all over their armor. The runes even extend to like the base. There's just like cracked runestone all over there. But you've got the sort of common classic trends, the dwarves with their little like winged helmets, sort of coming back to the Norseness there. And once again, you get this huge angular blade. It's not an axe, so how do you make a sword or a spear look dwarfish? You make it ridiculous. That's how. Big geometric shape.
It's interesting that this does seem to be very much an iteration of a Games Workshop or even a Warcraft dwarf. It's very much like the same design principles. No one's trying to reinvent the wheel. And you can see this even more in, I think, wood elves. I wouldn't even make a video on wood elves because they're all the same, basically. So there's some variety in dwarves. But it's not just that. You can sort of see different companies taking their own take. You've got a broken anvil miniature here.
Yeah.
And this guy is just weird.
Yeah, this guy is extremely stocky. Broken Anvil really went with that thick
World of
proportions.
Warcraft.
Yeah,
sure.
really, yeah. I think it works to his advantage.
He's
like
got sunglasses on.
He's got an eye patch, and then the other eye is covered by his own eyebrow.
Okay, right, it's a giant eyebrow.
So effectively, he's got two eye patches. He's just born with one, apparently. By just making him really stocky, that makes it very apparent he'd be really hard to knock over or, you know, deal with, basically. He's going to be a thorn in your side until he's dead.
A huge contrast to like the Lord of the Rings dwarves, which I think based on the fact that they're depicting a downsized human, they don't have the crazy proportions. Whereas a lot of the fantasy dwarves detached from the New Line Cinema depiction, they all go for like, well, if they're 5 foot tall, they need to be 5 foot wide.
Yeah.
They're so stocky and powerful, and it's to represent a completely different way of gameplay. It's kind of interesting seeing that. We also haven't talked about Age of Sigmar and the Caradon Overlords or the Fire Slayers.
Yes, because in the forefront of trying to make your own identities, Games Workshop is also trying to create their own. So we have Caradon Overlords and the Fire Slayers.
And very funnily, I quite like Caradon Overlords. I don't think they all hit the mark, but I think they're a fun, unique take on dwarves. They still have a lot of what I like. They're a little bit different. The Fire Slayers, however, I hate them. I cannot stand them, which is ironic because I really like Slayers. Fire Slayers were basically, what if we made the Slayers a full faction? And it just doesn't work. There's so little design space for these really I'm gonna anger like 4% of the miniature population when I say this. I really like Slayers, but it's not a full faction. Let's have Chaos Dwarves.
No, because I really like what they've done with the new Chaos Dwarves. They've got a really nice design. Again, straight into all those angled geometrics and stuff, plus the spikes. Big tall hats, absolutely zany. You can't mistake this silhouette. You know, immediate character. Boom, that's your recipe. That's exactly the reason why I don't like Vatan. To be honest, I don't really care for the Caradon Overlords either. But the Chaos Dwarves are great.
How dare you have an opinion I disagree with?
I know, right?
It's almost like it's personal, subjective taste.
But the fact that they exist, I'm completely fine with. I'm happy. Like, if you like this faction, that power to you, that's great. But just personal aesthetics, not my thing.
Thank you so much to the patrons who support our channel. Your names are scrolling up or down, probably down. In fact, always down the screen. If you'd like to help support the production of the videos we make on Tabletop Time and you enjoy what you watch and you want to see some behind the scenes, mini review, things like that, please consider becoming a patron of the channel. So that was our short video on dwarves.
I don't know.
Look, overall my experience doing this was basically realizing that what I love, and I'm going to assume a lot of people love, are the classics. There's the origins of the myth, the majesty, the magic, and just those classic things that make dwarves dwarves are what is very appealing. And it's really hard to step outside that and make the faction appealing, but when it works, it works.
Yeah, and like the effort to try something new is always appreciated, but there's always a funny line that you need to adhere to keep the inherent nature of that thing. If you're going to go elsewhere and create something else, that's well and fine, but it doesn't need to be a dwarf, so don't make it a dwarf, just make something completely new.
There's a certain point where your dwarves are like 5'2" and in a sci-fi setting and just humans that, what? You know, what are they? What's going on? I don't know. They kind of cease to have any identity. And I think that you can run the risk of that happening. But overall, that was our exploration of dwarves. I don't think we'll be doing an exploration of filthy knife-eared elves, will we?
Oh, wow, no, not with that language. But if you feel similar, or even if you feel the complete opposite, let us know. We'd love to read about it.
It's funny because I actually am so much more an elf person than a dwarf person.
Yeah.
So I was just teasing. I love you, elves. You're beautiful.
All right, have fun. Also, extra thing. Dwarfs are dwarves. Dwarves made by Tolkien. That's literally an invention by him. Dwarfs is the plural. Dwarves was just made by Tolkien for his universe. Ha!